Afternoon. My name is Geese. Oh, there we go. Recording in progress. All right, awesome. Hi, everyone. Geese. Yep. Nancy, is that you? Who just said hello? Oh, Andrea, that's you. Hi, everyone. Gisa Sateri. I am with SAAC. I am the industry chair for the Acquisition COI. Welcome. We have we have an amazing guest speaker today, and so we're looking forward to the discussion. So thank you all for joining us. I'll do a quick round of intros of our COI team members. I think we have majority of everyone on the call. Maybe we don't have our government chair on the call, but Mike Scorney from GSA is our government chair. And if he's not on the call yet, he'll hopefully be on the call later. Scott Simpson, a lot of you know him. He was the government chair on the DHS pill side, and now he has joined the dark side on the industry side, and he's serving as our industry co-chair. Ben Margolin with MetroStar is our industry vice chair. And then we have Andrea Azarkan-Heller, who recently joined us as our communications chair from GSA, and Nicole Nunn from Nivitech, who's our program chair. And Nicole's going to be monitoring our chat today. So if you have any questions throughout the discussion with our guest speaker, Dave Z, you'll be able to just put them in the chat, or I think depending on how many people we have on the call, we may be able to just open up the mics and let you just raise your hand and ask the question as well. So if you want to come off mute at some point after we get to the Q&A portion, we may do that. And so with that, let me turn it, well, before I go actually into that, let me just share some of the things that we've been doing within the Acquisition COI. We've had a very busy year and a half, I guess it's been, with all the changes that have been going on within government and acquisition at the center of all of that. We started off the year with a number of events and sessions with different speakers around the changes to the FAR overhaul. We have a number of other ongoing sessions. We'll have the discussion today about how are protests changing. And then we have some other events coming up the rest of the summer and into the fall regarding a lot of the changes you're seeing in acquisition with shorter time frames and quicker turnarounds. How are those affecting industry, and how are agencies kind of adopting some of those changes? So with all that, stay tuned. We will have all of those kinds constantly posted on our LinkedIn page and via the ACT-IAC newsletters that go out. So with that, let me turn it over to Scott so he can introduce our guest speaker for today.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Scott Simpson with Konya Government Services, and today we have a really great guest with us, Dave Zvenyach. Dave has worn a lot of different hats throughout the years. The best one that I saw him wear was actually one during COVID when his hair was super long. But besides that, he's been an executive with GSA over at the Technology Transformation Services. He has started, I don't know how many small businesses, including one that focused on artificial intelligence. He's got a law degree, and he likes to tinker with code in the basement. So I don't know where you hang all your hats, Dave, but thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. By the way, I've been able to get out of the basement. Now I'm in my office. So
oh wow, you got an office now. Excellent.
So it's nice to get the upgrade there. Thanks for having me. It's obviously awesome to be with y'all. And always a pleasure to chat, Scott. So maybe do you want me to do an intro just about I'll give maybe just a little bit more detail in terms of where I'm coming from. So hey everyone, I'm Dave Z. As Scott said, I've been around the block, as it were. Most recently, my last job in government was at GSA, where I was the Deputy Commissioner for the Federal Acquisition Service and Director of the Technology Transformation Services. As Scott mentioned, I have a law degree, but most of my time now is focused on procurement data and helping surface better procurement data for companies that are trying to navigate this crazy world that we live in. I also write a newsletter called GovContrActually, which tends to skew in terms of bid protests. We're going to talk a little bit about bid protests today. I'm not a protest attorney. Never tried to be a bid protest attorney, but I've been on sort of both sides of the conversation about whether protests are good, bad, and indifferent, and I just think they're awesome. I think they're rich material for understanding the most important thing, which is the conflict. When things don't work out the way that you expect it to, that's where you learn the most. So I enjoy protests.
Same. I love a good protest in the morning.
Yeah.
A protest decision in the morning. I'm going to go with protest decision because at least when the decision comes out, like it's over. You don't have to start that rule of 5 book or whatever. So yeah, so let's dive right into protests. This has been like a really strange 12 months with everything that's been going on. Executive orders were flying. We went through Doge and the cuts, and then there was the end of year, and there's been ups and downs in spending. So with all of that, what are you seeing in terms of just the pure numbers of protests?
Yeah, so a couple of interesting things. The first most notable trends to me is that despite everything, there have been basically the same number of protests. Protests basically look and feel and read the same way that they did before, before the last 12 months, or I guess 15 months. Everything, if you were to read GAO opinions sort of just flat and sort of without any sort of priors, you would think that nothing else is going on. So I think that's maybe the most interesting thing is that you've seen historical trends. So there's been sort of declines from sort of its peaks. But it sort of hovers at around, I think it's 1,800, something like 1,800 protests per year. That does get a little bit inflated and adjusted because in a weird quirk, and I should say GAO protests, it's harder to answer COFC because the data is less visible and impossible to answer for agency protests because there's no data. But in terms of the data that you can see pretty visibly, GAO tends to be pretty stable year over year. So that's been interesting. And although I think one other maybe sort of surprise is that despite a lot of sort of regulatory activity in terms of the revolutionary fire overhaul, obviously a lot of consolidation, a lot of other changes, there's basically been no meaningful substantive changes in terms of what the GAO is doing or reviewing when it comes to agencies. You're not seeing any sort of shocking new sort of theories of,
Well, thanks for joining us, Dave. I really appreciate that. And we're all done now. So how?
Well, I mean, there
nothing new. It's all same old.
There are some subtle trends that I'm happy to dive into in a bit. But I do think that maybe the most surprising trend, like I said, the thing that you'd expect, knowing nothing else about protests, you'd expect there to be a lot of change, and there hasn't been. The data hasn't borne that out.
Interesting. So, have we had our first protest on the RFO yet?
Honestly, I haven't seen it. I've seen cases where they acknowledge the existence of the RFO, but I haven't seen anything that's been substantively different.
Interesting. All right. So they're just kind of playing by the same old rules, doing the same old thing. As long as you do what you say you were going to do in your solicitation, you're on solid ground.
Okay, so I'll give you one of the trends because I don't want to give the wrong impression here. So one trend that I actually think is kind of surprising, and it really is it's not a overnight trend, but it is something that you're seeing, and you saw this actually peak last year, is a shift toward earlier withdrawals. And so, obviously for those that aren't steeped into this, you could file a bid protest at GAO and you have 100 days, which is supposed to be considered. And typically, a case has the opportunity to discuss beforehand with the GAO attorney whether or not you're likely to win or you're not likely to win. And so there's also documents that are coming back and forth beforehand. There's sort of this pre-decision discussion. And ultimately, with things that when you finally get to it, you get all the way to the end to a decision. Fine. In the last couple of years, you've seen the number of early withdrawals go up from, so in 2021, roughly 3 out of every 10, so 30% of withdrawn protests happened in the first 3 weeks. So First 3
They
weeks.
just wanted to see the file, and after they saw the file, they thought, no, we're out of here.
Exactly. They want to see what's going on. But in 2025, that was 50%. 50% of withdrawals happened in the first 3 weeks, which to me tells me either we're seeing a lot more early corrective actions, or we're seeing companies that are more dug in and saying, I'm going to see this thing all the way to the end. And so that is an interesting trend. You're seeing a steady increase, but like I said, 1 out of every 2 withdrawals happens in the first 3 weeks.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Which is saving money for the government, or, you know, for the vendor, and saving time for the government. So it's a good trend.
And so like this, you know, to preview a little bit of what we're also going to talk about down the road, it's also, you know, depending on sort of your Rorschach test, you either think of this strategic behavior on the part of the protester, or you see it as a perfectly reasonable response to agencies overstepping, you know, their discretion. So yeah, that is one notable data trend, is that you're seeing a lot more early withdrawals.
Interesting. So what other trends have you seen, especially from the, you know, we had the big 37-day shutdown, and that delayed all of the decisions coming out from the end of FY25, but we're past that now. So what are some of the big trends you saw from the end of FY25 in terms of protest decisions? So
I've seen a couple of things that are notable. So and again, like it's hard to sort of say whether this is like a 2025, 2026 thing. They're really sort of like more, there's not like a hard break. You're sort of seeing these things evolve over time. One has been, and it's been surprising to me, is the role of the interested party. The interested party rule has been, obviously, it was kind of a big deal as part of the percipient AI decision, but it's also been an ongoing and sort of now becoming a much more common challenge from the governments to protesters, saying that the party isn't interested. And so, again, if you're not steeped in sort of protest land, one of the things that you have to prove is not just that the government screwed up, but that it would be likely that you would win the award. And so even if the government's like totally botches an evaluation, but your evaluation was so bad that it wouldn't matter, you're not going to get, you're not going to get the award. But there's also this idea that if you aren't eligible to even win an award in the first place, you can't challenge it. You can't be an interested party. And one of the ways that this manifests is around vehicles. So if you're not on the right vehicle, and the government puts a solicitation out or a task order against that vehicle, and you're not on it, you can't protest. You're not an interested party.
And you can't protest the award, but
correct.
You could maybe protest the solicitation.
Yeah, but once it's post solicitation, once the proposals are in, you can't really. There's not a pre-solicitation protest. You're out of luck. And so you're seeing a lot of interested party sort of denials and dismissals that are coming out from GAO. And I think where some of this is related is just we've seen more contract consolidation and category management and sort of more things going on vehicles. And because there are more things going on vehicles, it's harder. It's harder for a protester to claim the win. You're also seeing, I think, a fair amount of like cyber activities. So there's a fair amount of like cyber phase 3s. That are saying, hey, the government should have used my requirement, and the government basically saying, well, you don't meet our needs, or we have something else that we're trying to do. That's sort of been I think a more recent development. Probably reflects the fact that there are more people are paying attention to cyber phase 3s than before. So that's another notable thing.
And that trend may just increase because, as we've seen in the rewrite of Part 8 with your required sources, there's going to be this new required use category that is mandatory for use across the government. And so, as companies are kind of shut out of those required use ones, those kind of protests from, companies who may or may not be interested parties, those may increase this year.
Correct. And so I would expect to see more of that. That's that is a. I'm not sure how it cuts, right? You may see more pre-solicitation protests. You may see more things end up in denials. You may see some more, strategic efforts for people to get on vehicles. Like there are different ways that this might sort of have secondary impact. But I definitely think that the interested party rule is showing up more in decisions than it used to.
Okay.
And maybe one thing to also note is that, and I did this analysis and it surprised me, but there's a nuance to it, which is that when you have sustains, poor evaluation criteria, or basically improper evaluation has gone up percentage-wise. So you're finding more improper evaluation cases getting wins on the merits. But when you look at the overall population of success, it's basically the same rate. So what that's telling me is that other grounds for protest are actually getting smaller and smaller and smaller in terms of their success. So like OCI pops up a lot, but it's not a very common success story.
So in terms of percentages, like what you're saying is that the evaluation teams out there who are not following what they said they were going to do in the solicitation, that as a percentage of sustained protests is going up. Interesting. I wonder what's contributing to that. I wonder if under the RFO that'll reverse, because the Revolutionary Fire Overhaul is pushing people towards 8 and 16, a lot simpler. And really, as long as you follow what you said you were going to do in the solicitation, you should be on pretty solid ground in there.
And you're seeing a lot of that. I mean, what's interesting is that GO is already very differential, sort of in general. But when it's Part 8 or Part 16, it's basically you can do whatever the hell you want. So you're seeing a lot of you've seen that number go up. But again, I think it's a little bit misleading because it's not like evaluations are getting worse. I think or that evaluations are becoming more successful as a general proposition. I think it's just that as other grounds are becoming less effective, that's been sort of the more relied upon basis to be successful.
Okay. You mentioned earlier, and then I'm going to get to a question from the chat here. You mentioned earlier the overall success rate. So what was the overall success rate of protests most recently? It used to be, like 8 out of 10 protests, the government won.
Yeah, this is probably my least favorite metric in government because it's how you define.
But Kalshi wants to know.
Yeah, well, Kalshi would have a field day with it. So GAO has this publication. They put out their bid protest statistics every year. And the effectiveness rate is the one that they probably rely on. And it's about 50%. So 50% of cases are just determined to be effective. The reason that I find this to be a little bit, misleading is it includes those withdrawals, right? So if there's corrective action taken, they consider that an effective protest. So I don't know. The actual number of sustains, it's about 14%, 15% every year. One exceptional year was 2023 with the CIO-SP4 decision, which spiked the numbers just because you had many protesters on the same case.
Yeah. So Ryan asks, protests can often impact customers' operational cadence in their business cycle. It causes delays of months, if not years. Have you ever seen someone who was able to quantify the impact to government in terms of the delay of time and resources and that kind of thing?
A great question. I think this is actually one of my beefs when I was in government is that we would go to extraordinary lengths to avoid a protest, even if the actual protest timelines would be shorter than the amount of efforts that we put in to avoid the protest in the first place. I don't know of any sort of formal empirical analysis about how much the cost of delay is on the government side. Delay. The reality too that's tricky is that it varies from forum to forum, and there's because you can go to GAO or you can go to COFC, and it's a choice. There's a very wide range in terms of what the timelines could be. And so that I think is a trick or a challenge for the government is you don't know which forum it's going to be in. the NITAC sort of CIOSP4 decision happened at GAO, but the Polaris decision, for example, happened at COFC. And so you've just got different venues where you might see sort of these big blockbuster protests. And so I think agencies are sort of, they're right to be worried, but I think they overstate the risk. As my own sort of like lived experience is that there's an overcorrection in terms of protest risk. But I mean, again, if you look the other way and you say, well, what's up with these early withdrawals and all these this effectiveness rate, you'd say, well, turns out half of the cases, could have been resolved, with a protest. So I don't know. I think that there's maybe my meta reaction to that is I agree. Protest risk is, in terms of the timelines, are probably overstated, and yet there tends to be a bit of a how you feel about protests sort of is related to your perspective on whether contracting officers screw up a lot. And if you think contracting officers screw up a lot, you're probably going to be more inclined to support protests. And if you're inclined to think that contracting officers mostly get it right, you're going to be sort of skeptical of protests. It really sort of, I find that the answer to that question can be revealing. It's like, well, how much discretion do you think they should have? You can sort of you can guess how people feel about protests at some level. So
I think there's some interesting things in the RFO there that are going to help or impact those numbers as well.
Yep.
Some parts of the RFO talk about, using innovations like your notice of intent and your advisory down selects. And obviously that kind of reduces the pool of possible vendors.
Yeah,
and then they also look at or talk about if you've got a big requirement and a whole bunch of it is simple and commercial, and there's just a little piece of it that's non-commercial, that you should look to see whether you can do the non-commercial piece as one procurement and the rest of it as either, one procurement or multiple procurements. And so those multiple procurements, if it's simple, non-complex, commercial, that's done under your 8 and 16 again. Very rarely will it be done under 12.
Right.
And then there's just that one little sliver that's over done either in 13, 14, 15.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting. One thing that actually is probably worth mentioning out loud too, because I guess this didn't show up in the trends, but it does show up in sort of like what GAO is looking at. We've seen a lot of acquisition innovation over the years, things like advisory down selects, oral evaluations. Those are also popping up more frequently, right? So you'll see those in the GAO decisions. The method of evaluation is changing over time. What I guess is interesting is that doesn't seem to have changed the results in terms of the number of sustains, right? So that the sustain rate is basically the same, and the evaluation, the effectiveness rates are effectively the same. How much is the different methods of evaluation actually shifting the needle? It doesn't look like it's shifting it all that much if you look at this empirically. That said, what I have noticed, and actually I was looking at a decision from earlier today, you do have some interesting protest grounds that are starting to show up with these innovations. So a couple of weeks ago, there was a protest involving an oral transcript, an oral evaluation, and the agency dinged a company and basically said that the company was gave them a negative score, and they gave another company a positive score. And the protester was like, "Look at the transcript. The transcript of this basically says we should that the government is out of line here." And GAO looked at the transcript and they're like, "Yep, we agree." And so I do think there's you can imagine that just being done in paper, which is how it used to be. But with the rise of orals and sort of transcripts, like there are different ways of that happening too. And like with AI, you're going to start to see some more readiness of transcripts where you might not have had it before. So there's more ability to evaluate that. There's also, the multi-step stuff is showing up as well. One funny thing, there's actually a decision, like I said, there's a decision today that I was thinking about where there was a discrepancy between the oral evaluation and the written sort of evaluation that happened in the two-step. So they got through step one, and then they got in step two, and then they realized that step one was wrong. And it was related to FedRAMP effectively. So they got through the FedRAMP gate, and it turns out it was an on-prem solution. And so they got dinged because it was an on-prem solution. But it was sort of, well, how is this supposed to go? Protester lost the case. So I don't know. There's some interesting stuff that's happening in terms of how these things are getting litigated. But I think the shift toward more deferential vehicles is probably going to serve the government over time.
Yeah. There's a question in the chat about AI. We're going to get to that in a little bit. So for now, I want to ask, we saw something that I'd never seen before in my 15 years.
Okay.
A judge from Office of Health Administration?
No, it was OHA's the Office of Hearing and Appeals, SBA.
There you go. A judge terminated an SBA contract. And I have never heard of that before. Normally, what I've seen is a judge or a GAO attorney says the government shall terminate, or we recommend, because some of the GAO cases are just recommendations, and the government has to show whether. So what happened here? And is this legal? Are we going to see this more often?
Yeah, this is an interesting case. So it was at the Small Business Administration Office of Hearings and Appeals. And the backstory is that the Air Force issued a contract, or issued a solicitation that was set aside for small business for elevator maintenance, basically. I think it was like vertical something or other, but it's basically elevator maintenance. And the company that won is a company called Pelican. And Pelican basically, admittedly, had very little experience managing elevators. And there's another company called Veteran Elevated Solutions, which gives you some suggestion of what business they're in. They challenged the small business designation for Pelican. They said Pelican is not really a small because it's something all this work to Otis Elevator, which is not a small business. And under the ostensible subcontractor rule, Pelican shouldn't be deemed small. This went to the SBA. The SBA area office basically was like, no, it's small, it's fine. And then it went up to OHA, and OHA looked at it, and on appeal, they're like, you know what, we screwed up. We're going to give it another look. And so it went back to the SBA for, the Air Force, the SBA area office, right? So this was an appeal to SBA, right? So SBA said, we're going to take corrective action effectively, and they didn't do it. They just kind of sat around. So for 9 months, nothing happened. They didn't reevaluate, Pelican. Pelican kept delivering, doing the award. And at some point, Veteran Elevated Services Solutions was like, well, we won. We sure would like to be able to bid on this thing. And so they went back to OHA, and I had never seen anything like this either. OHA was like, the SBA, we gave show cause to the SBA. SBA didn't answer. They didn't even answer a show cause, which is astonishing. And so the judge was like, all right, forget it. I'm just going to deem Pelican ineligible for an award. And so you're right. They normally remand, or they normally sort of direct someone else to do it. But I guess canceling contracts was a thing in sort of the nomenclature in the last couple of years. They just canceled the contract.
Maybe it was on that judge's bucket list.
Yeah, I guess so.
It's there's this story about this really great umpire from baseball, and he was good friends with one of the managers of this club. And the manager said, hey, when you retire, I want to be the last manager that you throw out of a game. And so it, years go by, it's his last game. And, he calls one of the manager's players out and he comes out and he starts arguing. The umpire's like, what are you doing? You know that my call is right. And the manager's like, yeah, but this is our last game together. It's really interesting that the judge was able to do that and that wasn't appealed itself, if they can appeal that to anybody.
Well, I mean, you mentioned Kalshi, right? So maybe that was a prop bet. Maybe this was a sort of thing where there was the insider trading on Kalshi. It's like,
let's hope not.
Will the SBA, deem someone ineligible this year? Yes, happened.
Hopefully, there's not a market for that out in Kalshi or whatever one of these websites is. But
Right.
okay, well, that's really interesting, and I guess we'll have to stay tuned to see if that happens again in the next 12 months, or if that is just kind of this one-off that we're not going to see come back for a while.
Look, I think the one thing that's interesting, I mean, SBA as particularly as it relates to 8A, there's been a ton of activity with SBA and OHA. So I kind of, in sort of the legal realism world, we talk about like the law isn't what, the law doesn't matter as much as like what the judge ate for breakfast this morning. It's possible that like the OHA is just like, I'm tired of this. I don't care. I'm doing it. It's because got a lot of other things happening around here, people. Let's go.
So do we know whether Veteran Elevated Service eventually got the award?
I don't. At the moment, I have not been able to determine that. So.
We'll have to check FPDS later on.
That's right. Sam.gov.
Sam.gov. I just keep seeing FPDS. Like, I can't help it. I'm one of those people that like love to hate on FPDS NG, but like, darn it, I grew up with it.
FPDS NG.
That's right. Ditto, Scott.
Well, I like the OG FPDS NG. So we got a question in the chat here about artificial intelligence, and Dave, I know that you love AI and all that kind of stuff. So do I. That's what I do with CONIAG. So do you see companies relying on AI to put together protest filings? And is it working?
Well, not just companies. I mean, one of the fun trends. I don't know. It's definitely a trend. AI is very much a thing in protests. It's happening where this is most visible is that GAO almost every time it happens. I guess they would probably every time they notice it, there will be fake GAO cases that are cited by one of the parties, and so they'll cite this case. The case will be wrong. It doesn't exist, and GAO will sort of say, you have an obligation to like make sure that these are real cases, and you didn't do that. And in almost all cases, they ultimately don't implement sanctions. I haven't actually seen sanctions, sort of ordered, but they threaten sanctions. Like, you can be sanctioned for this, and one of the sanctions could be that you're prevented from filing protests. So like, there's a real threat here. But yeah, I mean, it happens a lot. I mean, probably once a month, there's someone who does something, at least, where there's hallucinations. And what's wild is not just pro se litigants. There was a case not that long ago, maybe within the last month or two, where there was an attorney who relied on West or Lexis, I don't remember which one, but they relied on sort of their commercial AI.
I've seen it. It's good.
And well, it came up with some fake cases, and they didn't catch it, and they admitted to the GAO that they didn't see it, and GAO was like, well, you still, even though you rely on West or Lexis, you have an obligation to make sure that these cases are real. So that's definitely happening. The other thing too is that it's not just in the protests themselves. Obviously, you're seeing AI used as part of the proposal process. I think nobody on this call will be surprised by that. You're also shocked. You're also seeing AI used by government in sort of two different ways. So there was a case not that long ago involving the DORA bot. And if you don't know what DORA bot is, it's I don't remember what the D stands for, but
Department of Responsibility Automation, I think.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
And basically, DORA bot didn't catch a document as part of the responsibility determination. The government basically, because Dorabot didn't find it, they didn't look at it. And the protester was like, this is some adverse information that you should have looked at. And the government was like, well, we relied on Dorabot, and GAO let it slide. So like that's happening right now, is Dorabot's a thing. And then there was another decision.
Full disclosure, Koniag created Dorabot.
Oh, well,
I wasn't
okay,
part of
fair
that
enough.
team.
Well, you know, precision and recall, like you got some work to do in terms of finding those documents. Even though humans, as it turns out, misses things as well. But in this particular case, yeah, the Dorabot showed up in a GAO decision. There was another decision in a case called Salient CRGT, where Salient argued that the Air Force relied on AI as part of the evaluation process, and that ultimately wasn't evaluated by GAO. GAO sort of noted it and moved on, but because the Air Force said, no, we had human evaluators. But it wouldn't surprise me if we see something where GAO has to take it head on about like the propriety of using AI as part of government evaluation. So yeah, I mean, AI is very much it's present in the ecosystem, and it's showing up in sort of interesting ways in the decisions.
So we've got a question from Gisa.
So, just actually right on the AI question, and you just touched on it, Dave. So just recently there was a small business procurement that had gone out from this agency to a select number of small businesses, and one small business got kicked out immediately because the header of one of the graphics was not, the font size was off from what the government had asked for. So they, in essence, they sought legal advice because they saw that as non-material, right? So then, and the advice they received from the legal advice from their lawyer was that AI is doing a lot of the evaluations and immediately just going through and plucking out the ones that are not, whatever non-compliance they see. And GAO is just backed up right now with all these protests and not worth protesting it. Are we going to see lots more things like that?
Listen, maybe. I will say, when I was back in 2015, I was doing some automated evaluation compliance check things too. So like automation and compliance checking isn't necessarily a novel thing to 2025 and 2026, but LLMs certainly are. And because they're not deterministic, because they're probabilistic, or I guess stochastic is the term that we should probably use. There's much more, the ability to actually understand why, or to audit or to confirm that the compliance itself was valid, is harder. But again, I think it's also true that LLMs are becoming ubiquitous in sort of people's daily lives, and so there's more acceptance, I guess, a growing acceptance of its role. And so we'll see. I don't know which way this cuts, but it's very much it's real. It's here. It's showing up in strange ways. And GAO, for the most part, has kind of just been like, acknowledging its existence, but not really taking it head on. But it wouldn't surprise me to see some decisions come out this year. What I will say is that GAO doesn't seem particularly fond of how AI has shown up in its forum, right? Because there are so many hallucinated cases, it puts work and burden on GAO attorneys. I think there's some frustration there.
Go ahead, Gisa. My prediction for that is going to be that as long as the government can show that they still did what they said they were going to do in the solicitation, that even if they are using an LLM to do it, so long as they follow that guideline, that it should be all right. And so, the solicitation says 12-point font, and you're not using 12-point font, and an LLM catches it. I mean, that was the rule, and that would be a pre-solicitation protest then.
Right.
Yeah.
So you wonder in the past, if there was no AI, kind of evaluation, would that have, in essence, it's one header on one table you give a pass? Or is it that the AI says no, kick it off, and there was still a set of eyes that go on it and say no, not worth it to throw it out?
Now I have to invoke, there's a really interesting paper about a month or two ago from a university, I think it was either it was the University of Chicago law professor or in the University of Chicago Law Review, where they were talking about LLM judges on conflicts of law decisions. And famously, conflicts of law is both a very predictable sort of area of law, but also kind of one of those weird things where there's sometimes strange exceptions. What they found, they did a study, and like in 2024 they did it, and basically AI wasn't very good. But in 2025 they redid the same study, and that LLMs got it 100% of the time right, and judges got it about 80% of the time right. And so, like, you know, the LLMs were more effective at the black letter law than actual judges were in terms of black letter law. But the question is whether or not that's actually what we want from a judicial system, whether we want there to be sort of like this totally mechanistic application of law, or whether you want there to be sort of human factors that play in. So you raise a good question, Gisa. I don't know how this is all going to play out, whether you want like the mechanistic 12 inch size 12 font. The real question, I think, at some level becomes, why is that a requirement for the solicitation in sort of this era anyway? Does that really help you evaluate whether or not a company is good or not? This is the Brown M&M test, I guess, is sort of the famous, Van Halen thing, to sort of see whether or not it was they were paying attention. I don't know. We're going to see how this all plays out. But I do think that it's we're seeing obviously how AI is affecting the landscape, and I don't see that going away.
It's interesting you mentioned the judges and how effective they are. Anthropic last week released, Anthropic is the maker of Claude AI. They released last week this paper or research paper about which jobs were most likely to be taken over by AI. Judges wasn't on the list.
Yeah.
I guess it should be though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, maybe I don't know. The AI exposure thing is it's a real question.
Fair enough. Okay, so we got a question in the chat here about the RFO, and the question is basically, what KPIs could you look at, what key performance indicators or what indicators could you look at coming out of protests this year to see whether the RFO was effective or not?
Well, I mean, look, I actually don't know that I would look at the RFO. I don't know that I would use protest signals as a way to evaluate the effectiveness of the RFO. I mean, I think that to me, the RFO is going to be successful or not successful if agencies get delivery on mission faster and better. Like, to me, whether or not they're more successful or less successful at protest is going to be isn't really the goal. I mean, you can imagine a world in which you just don't have protests. You know, it's like no protests, full stop. But that wouldn't necessarily be a better system, because it would mean that people don't have the ability to challenge sort of incorrect behavior on the part of the government. So I think, to me, what I would be looking at in terms of KPIs are more aligned with PALT. It's more aligned with cost efficiency or cost effectiveness or cost savings, cost avoidance. Obviously, the requirements and sort of whether or not requirements are satisfied. And actually, my own personal perspective is that the most important thing are the performance metrics after award, whether or not people are actually able to deliver the things they promised pre-award, and whether or not they're effective delivery outcomes. So to me, that's what the RFO should be focusing on.
And that's, as part of the RFO team, that's what we were looking at correcting, right? Like this notion that procurements take too long, that we spend too much money on procurements, and that we don't actually get what we said we were going to get in the solicitation. And so the RFO is trying to fix all of those things.
Yep. And I mean, what's interesting too, and I did in a little prep of this. So like I said, I'm not a protest attorney. So like, I'm not like, I don't spend all my time.
Not a software engineer either, but you code, so.
That is true. I'm not super well steeped in sort of like the deep history of protests. But I do think that it's interesting that, you know, we're still kind of in the early innings of like COFC as an institution, right? Like we're still in early innings of what it means to be able to even have bid protests that go to like the courts, because from 1940 to like 1970, you couldn't even bring a protest in the district court. And so there's, I think there's still a lot of changes that we'll expect to see in terms of how protests show up in terms of people's work. But I think when I evaluate protest sort of acquisition policy writ large, protests are just like a small piece. They just happen to be for me the most fun. Like they're the most sort of visible sort of moments where things get off the rails.
One of the things that I think protests will be able to tell us about the RFO is whether that it was actually implemented efficiently, because the RFO was done so fast. And, you know, one of the premises was, let's take out everything that isn't required by statute. And so it'll be interesting to see what GAO's review of that is later on, to see, did they actually take something out that was required by statute? Did they dig too deep? And does anything conflict there?
It's a good question, actually. I mean, you know, one of the hypotheses that sort of preceded is that a lot of the FAR was intended to be guidance, effectively, to folks to avoid missteps that, you know, that reflect GAO decisions. We'll see. I mean, obviously, the practitioner albums are sort of the belt and suspenders approach to this, which is to say, you know, we may be taking out FAR text, but we're including practitioner albums so that people don't screw up in different ways. I mean, look, I also, you know, I do think that there's an interesting argument about how AI could be used by the governments to reduce its protest risk. There are some ideas that I've seen sort of floating around over the past couple of years about sort of pre-award sort of reviews by the government to sort of reduce the likelihood that they screwed something up in evaluation that would have been really difficult with humans, but is easier with LLMs to sort of evaluate the range of risks. I don't know. It's I think we're in an interesting time with where the intersection of the RFO and sort of the risk conversation for government might change pretty dramatically in a positive way.
Well, let's pivot here for a second, because the other, you know, staying on the RFO, the purpose of the RFO was to reduce regulation, but maintain the statutes. Now there's a second phase of the RFO where they're looking at legislative proposals to actually change statutes. And a lot of those are going to have impacts on, you know, protests, like the loser pays. So what do you see happening with those, and what do you feel like they're going to do in terms of protests and reducing the number or getting them better?
Yeah, so I mean, look, I think that I kind of previewed this a little bit. I'm kind of a bit skeptical of legislative reform in terms of how they would affect protests, just because I think that things like loser pays does reflect a little bit of your priors about whether you think that protests are strategic or whether you think protests are valid. And the answer is both, actually. Sometimes protests are totally strategic. Sometimes protests are completely valid.
It depends.
It depends. And so, I mean, I don't know that loser pays is going to deter someone who really believes that they've been wronged. And I'm not even sure that it's going to deter strategic protesting, because they may view it as a cost of doing business. I mean, these things are already expensive. And so, okay, I have to pay for the government's lawyer, fine. You know, like if the government, I don't know that, I don't know that that's sort of the direction that I would personally go in terms of the sort of legislative reforms around on procurement, on proposals, so protests. I mean, for me, and this is my own sort of soapbox, and since I'm here, I'm just going to soapbox it. I really wish there was more meaningful thinking around agency protests as a venue, both in terms of transparency, sort of consistency and process, and clarity around the around the timelines associated with it. So, the stays between COFC and agency protest and the like. I think there's some interesting reforms that could be done there. Just because I think that if agencies can correct it before it goes to GAO or it goes to COFC, that would be a preferable model, particularly as they're seeing more sort of early withdrawals. It seems like it's moving in that direction anyway. And so I would be interested in seeing some reforms around agency protests rather than sort of COFC and GAO protests.
As a CO, I remember having some really great agency protests where it was like, oh, you know what? Like, you're right here. I need to fix this. And as a good CO, that's what you do, right? You make it right. Yeah. So much cheaper and so much faster than going to GAO.
Right. And the incentives aren't really aligned that way, right? So the incentives are aligned to not use agency protest. And so I would be interested in seeing some of those reforms. I mean, I do think that the other area to sort of watch this space, I think interested party has the potential to become one of those political sort of topics, in the sense that if you are from the outside looking in, you think interested party is bad. If you're on the inside looking out, you think interested party looks good. It wouldn't surprise me as we start to see more, like I said, more sort of consolidation on vehicles. You see more maybe uncertainty with small business set-asides and the like. There's more people thinking about sort of the second order impacts of interested parties.
Yeah. Okay. You've already had two predictions on the thing today. The first prediction, if you weren't watching, is we're going to get a protest about the RFO, or that involves the RFO, I think. And then the second one about a protest that addresses AI. And I think it was specifically around the AI and evaluation. And so I'm American University law grad too. I love a good protest, but we haven't had a protest go up to the Supreme Court in a long time. Percipient almost did. What's your prediction on whether we have a protest that goes up to the Supreme Court in the next couple of years?
We did talk about this before, so I want to let you know that I did my homework. I checked call sheet, I did check Polymarket, and I checked long bets, and none of them have existing markets on this question for you, Scott.
No, so I'm shocked. No one's interested in this.
I think it's a small market. I don't know how we can drive up the volume sufficiently to make this worth anyone's time. So I want to say that I'm only operating on my own instincts, not what the market is going to tell you on this. But I'm a hard no protest at SCOTUS, no protest case at SCOTUS, at least through 2028. And I actually think it's going to be much longer than 2028. And here's my rationale. So the last time that something went up was Kingdom Ware in 2016. And from 1984 to 2016, there were basically no protest. There was no bid protest cases that went up to the Supreme Court. So it
was a long drought.
It's a long drought. And when you look at sort of the basis for granting a writ of certiorari, there's not the prospect of circuit splits. It's all running through the federal circuit. There's not, typically government contracts don't rise to the matter of national importance. That things like, other sort of more, I guess, politically salient topics might be. So I don't know that four justices wake up one day and say, I really want to hear a good bid protest case. I just don't see it
come on.
That said, I wouldn't be shocked if within the next 5 years we see a contract case go up to the Supreme Court. We saw some of that recently with sort of the sovereign immunity questions involving contractors. I think there's some real interesting questions about the socioeconomic categories, whether it involves a state and local government or federal government in terms of contracts. I wouldn't be surprised to see a contracts case make its way to the Supreme Court, but not a federal bid protest.
Well, that's too bad, but I'll keep my fingers crossed. I'm not going to put up a bid in for it or whatever.
If it happens, I'm going to camp outside the Supreme Court for that hearing. You better believe it.
I'm going to bring my old school FAR with me too.
Yeah.
See if one of the attorneys will sign it for me.
There you go.
There you go. Well, this has been great, Dave. We've got one more question in the chat, and it's something that you kind of tangentially brought up about, these protests that don't seem to have any merit.
Yeah.
Andrea calls them dumb protests. How do you reduce the ones that just don't have any merit? Has AI got a role there? Has RFO got a role there? Is it more like the people person kind of aspect to it?
I don't know, man. Like there's I guess so. Here's the thing. Everyone is the hero in their own story. If you're going through the effort of filing a bid protest, you probably believe in your heart that there's a reason to do it. Nobody just like wastes their time or their money just for the sake of wasting their time or their money. And so I think that they are certainly objectively dumb, but subjectively from the perspective of the protester, it's a real concern. And I really do think that, I think Jeff Kozis has said this in sort of public venues, but if he hasn't, and I butcher this, it's on me, not on him. But the best way to sort of now to reduce protest risk is better conversation between industry and government. And to that end, I mean, I do think that the way that we avoid more dumb protests is through better conversations between industry and government, which is why things like ACT-IAC are so important, right? So like to bring home the purpose of this sort of venue, having these spaces is really the best way that we avoid dumb protests.
I remember another time as a CEO, I got a call from one of my vendors on, First Source or something like that. And they said, Scott, how come I didn't get that last award? My bid was lower. I said, what are you talking about? You didn't submit a bid. He's like, yes, I did. And I had missed the email. It just completely missed it. But we were able to, avoid the protest because he picked up the phone and give me a call. And it was like, we've got this relationship going. So it was easy.
Yeah.
And yeah, I did something stupid, but we made it right. And like the other company, I had a relationship with the company that won too. And so I called them and I was like, look, this is what happened. I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to T4C your contract. No problem, Scott. That's what we would want to happen too.
Yep.
All good.
Yep.
Not to say that's gonna, that's utopia, but.
Yep. But I think that it's better. I mean, that's going to be a better option than sort of the formalistic approaches.
Yeah. Well, let's check. Gisa, Nicole, Mike, any last questions? Andrea, I saw Ben out there too.
I think we covered them all.
Awesome.
Do Mike and Ben or Andrea, do you have any questions before we close out? Okay.
Well, thanks for having me
Yep.
again. It's great to see you all.
Thank you, Dave. That was awesome. Always wonderful having you, and hopefully you'll come back again soon. We'll pick another topic that aligns well with all the things that you're doing currently.
Thanks very much, Dave.
All right. Talk soon. Thanks.
Thanks to everyone for coming and joining us today. We'll see you next month.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.